join with us in an effort to produce better learning successes for every learner who gives us their time. Typical e-learning characteristics that we see today that we feel are unfortunately absorbing a lot of people's time and attention. And with what we know from research, work characterized this way doesn't add up to a serious effort to use e-learning technology to full advantage. We see today's typical e-learning as being content-focused, loading too much content, squeezing out essential experience and practice. We see authoring efficiency as the focus, trying to minimize the amount of time an author spends when wasting learner time in the process. We see a focus on getting people in seats. Just a big attendance is sometimes scored as a big win, whether anybody is engaged or not. We see focus on just delivering knowledge with the assumption that content presentation leads to proficiency. We see fact testing as a focus where, testing short-term memory is one thing, but is that performance capability? Probably not. See one-size-fits-all designs where it doesn't matter what you answer to a challenge, you're going to get the same feedback that everybody else gets, and you're going to go on to the same next exercise, whether you're showing understanding or not. We have one-time events, thinking that one touch with people is going to change their performance in the future, and that's just wishful thinking that isn't going to happen, I think. And we see didactic feedback, correct, incorrect judgments that all of us forget right afterward. Really a tremendous force to do good in the world. Just a fantastic force to perhaps turn e-learning back on its path to be so helpful to all of us individually in our organizations.
We believe that learning technology offers the possibility for creating uniquely valuable learning experiences. We also believe, with a sense of sadness and profound frustration, that most e-learning fails to live up to its promise. We further believe that current trends evoke a future of only negligible improvements in e-learning design, unless something radical is done to bend the curve. Finally, we have concluded that in order to elevate e-learning to the height of its promise, we need to begin with a personal commitment to a new set of standards. Through our work in developing e-learning experiences and helping others do the same, we believe that we need to go beyond typical e-learning.
We've all seen the potential in e-learning and some terrific successes with it, and the opportunity is so wonderful. So we're doing the best we can to help both ourselves and everyone else realize what we have to do and commit to it.
Can you talk about the values for, let's say, serious e-learning, something that makes it a little bit different, something that takes e-learning to a higher level?
Sure, and I'm going to start. One of the first set of values is contents focused versus performance focused. What we see in the industry, and for good reasons, experts can't tell us what they do, and we work from a lot of content, and it makes it really easy to put up content, to provide a test, and it's understandable. But there's a problem with it. It's not effective. In cognitive science, that leads to what we call inert knowledge. You will study it and pass a test on it, and you go out in the real world where it's relevant, and it won't even get activated. To make learning stick, you need to focus on performance. You need to focus on not knowledge. What can people do that they can't do now? What do they need to be able to do? We need to focus rapidly on that performance and work backwards, aligning our learning to make that happen. So that's one of the core shifts between serious e-learning and traditional learning we need to make.
All right. The next one we talked about is that a lot of typical e-learning focuses on being efficient for authoring. We all know about rapid authoring tools, all of those kinds of things. And I think that one of the things that's sort of happened to us as a field is learning and development people are frequently don't have a lot of control in an organization. And so there's a tendency when you don't have a lot of control or influence to focus on the things that you can control or influence. And so one of the big areas where we can see progress and see how to get better is our sort of authoring efficiency. Can I do this faster? Can I do it more easily? You know, that's what the technology has kind of been leading people towards. But ultimately, we are not adding to our value within the organization if we just focus on reducing our costs for authoring or our time for authoring. What we really need in order to be able to give value to the organization is to figure out how do we make something meaningful for learning or meaningful to the learners and meaningful in the broader business context. And then, as Will was mentioning, have a feedback loop so that we can see the effects of what we're doing, but also make the effects of what we're doing visible to broader stakeholders so that we don't kind of get caught up in a loop of, you know, smaller and smaller budgets and, you know, less and less time and money to do things, because that's, you know, that's a cycle of failure that I think that a lot of people are kind of experiencing right now.
Another one of my favorite principles is attendance-driven versus engagement-driven. There's this implicit belief that, you know, if we build it, it is good. So as long as they're there, as long as they're attending, we can make them stick through it, that this is going to lead to learning. What, you know, so people are trying things like time next buttons. So we're not going to let them move on until they've spent so much time here. Like, that's going to make them pay attention. And it's just not. What we need to do is engage them. They have to understand why this is important. They have to understand why they should care. They should be making, we should be helping them understand why this is going to make a difference to them going forward. When we focus on engaging their interest and helping them recognize it, we're going to make a difference between just why they're, you know, that they have to sit there and be required to be there for a certain amount of time.
Building on what Clark just said is the next serious e-learning value, which is authentic context as opposed to just knowledge delivery. If people just present the content to you, you may as a learner have no idea whether it's going to be usable and useful to you at all. And I've actually heard trainers say in classes that I've been in, I know this is kind of foreign, but trust me, someday you'll be glad you know this. So I want us just to go on this pledge that really we're going to reveal the relevance to you at some point, but not now. Why not now, you know? And there's really an easy way to do it that I've found so effective in our work, and I believe it's a good place to start if you're not sure how to get going on all of this engagement stuff, and that is to create an authentic context. That is a situation that a learner might well perceive themselves falling into. And then the question comes to their mind right away, what do I do? And as they're assessing that, they're really becoming a sponge for all the help that you can give them. Because I don't want to look like I don't know how to do this, and I don't want to make a mistake and want to screw up, you know. So how do I solve this problem? Of course, if learners can demonstrate to you right away that they know how to solve this problem, then that's great. You want to push them on to another situation, because you really can't teach people things they already know. You can only waste their time going over it, you know, and frustrating them. So presenting authentic context is really the place to start, not organizing all of that content in a carefully organized outline and hierarchy and then stepping people through it. That will just bore them to death, and it does.
Another thing that we wanted to focus on is that in typical e-learning, there is just way too much fact testing. But if we, you know, the goal is to help our learners be able to perform in a on-the-job situation, in a future educational practice situation. And if we want to do that, the research is clear. To prepare people for performance situations, you know, they need to engage in realistic practice and realistic decision making. And here's one of the keys. E-learning is really good at that. So we ought to be doing that more. Julie, I think it's your turn.
Yeah, so the next one is one size fits all versus individualized challenges, and we really debated the inclusion of this one because one of the big promises of e-learning way back since the very beginning, since the early Plato days and things like that, was this idea that we were somehow going to be able to customize the experience for individualized learners. That was one of the big points of using technology for learning experiences, and it's been one of the least realized promises of technology. And I think one of the issues with that is that people perceive it to be about things like artificial intelligence. The system will automatically serve up an experience for the learners based on their performance or based on their actions or based on the pretest or things like that, and that's just overwhelming to most people. The level of technology and the level of programming required for that is kind of out of scope for most people. But it doesn't actually have to be like that. As Michael was kind of mentioning, it's really annoying to have somebody tell you stuff that you already know. And so one of the other ways that we can think about individualized challenges is creating kind of scaffolded environments where you get to answer challenges, deal with questions, and if you know the answer, you can keep going. But if you don't know the answer, then you can access resources or you can access assistance or coaching or other kinds of scaffolding. And that's another way, by giving learners more autonomy in their environments and more ability to decide what they're going to work on or how they're going to work on it, that we can give people more individualized experiences. Because I would agree that for most people, kind of an artificial intelligence environment's out of scope, but that doesn't mean that we can't leverage learners' intelligence to make experiences, to create environments that create more adaptive experiences for learners.
One of the other values that we wanted to bake into the manifesto was the notion of spaced practice. And this is based on the research finding on the spacing effect, which is, by the way, one of the most studied phenomena in the history of learning and memory research. But at the same time, it's one of the least utilized research-based opportunities in e-learning. The basic finding is this, that if you reinforce learning over time, that our learners remember better. And since sort of that's one of our goals as learning designers, we ought to be doing that. And again, e-learning is uniquely enabled to provide a connection to learners over time. So it's really something we ought to do. Michael, take the last one.
Thanks, Will. Real-world consequences. The real-world performance that we all are in when we're awake isn't so much guided by knowing what's supposed to be right and what's supposed to be wrong, but it's guided by our assessment or expectations of what the consequences are going to be if we do something or if we don't do something. The world teaches us a lot, of course. But our choices can be remembered and sustained and applied so much more effectively in a variety of situations if the feedback we've gotten while we were being trained was in terms of real-world consequences. What actually happens when you do this thing might be a bad thing. If you see that happening, even if it's just described textually, but of course it's nicer if it's enriched with media, if you see that bad thing happening because of what you did, you're much more likely to remember it. And if you see a great success happening because of what you did, you're much more likely to remember it. Now, real-world consequences don't always happen as immediate feedback. One decision and you're either a hero or you're a scum, They're often delayed and you have to make multiple choices before you actually find out if you're on the right path or not. Well, that's what we need to do in our e-learning as well. To make them authentic, to make them real-world, you sometimes need to allow your learners to make several choices before they start to see, oh, this is happening. And if you can allow them to back up and correct themselves, that's so much better than saying, no, Susan, you should have chosen this other choice, now choose it now. It's just a night and day difference in the impact. Well, that's our list. We readily admit that we may have overlooked some very important factors. There may be a bit of redundancy in our list, but We've looked at a lot of research, talked with people with a tremendous amount of experience who have guided us to put these lists together, and we feel that adherence, at least being aware of your choice not to apply and use these values, and deliberately choosing to do them, apply them, will make e-learning start to achieve far more of its potential that has been demonstrated, has been proven, but unfortunately seems in our haste to have so many people producing so much e-learning, it's swamped the real opportunity that we have. So we really sincerely hope this list is going to be helpful.
And how do the values affect the principles we're talking about, or vice versa? How do the principles affect the value? How do we implement these?
The values, we also worked through about 20 principles, and there's an example of just one on the screen right now, principle number 4, which is target improved performance. But we really kind of said, all right, you know, if people are going to actually start implementing these, we need to give them a little bit more than the kind of larger values. We want to get into a little bit more of the specifics about how to actually implement it. And here's another one, use interactivity to prompt deep engagement, enable learners to learn from mistakes, all of these kinds of things that get into some more of the nitty-gritty detail of exactly what this is going to look like in order for it to be useful design guidelines.
Well, I'm curious, what can people do and to implement this or to actually move forward?
Well, thanks, Rick. What can people do? Benchmark your current e-learning programs based on the 22 principles. Give yourself an honest reckoning, and then do a gap analysis. Where are you now, and where do you want to be, and how are you going to get there? Now, notice that this kind of work involves individuals throughout the e-learning industry.
This question is from Michael in Texas, and he says, what can we do with this? You know, I like this, but what can I do with the manifesto?
Right, and as Will mentioned, really we're hoping to provide some design guidelines to benchmark against. A lot of times I teach quite a few classes and people come in and they are looking for basically ammunition to help them with their stakeholders, to explain why certain things are important or why why it's going to take longer than a week to build an e-learning course or any of those kinds of things. And so really the intention is to use this as a tool to help people do the things that I know that they already want to do, which is build, do good work and build good things. People can use it for commercial purposes. If you want to structure a class around to kind of help everybody do better, be better, explain to their managers, what's important or what's useful when they're trying to do good e-learning work.
I'm familiar with these values and I endorse them, but it's really hard to get support. How do I get support within my organization, and how do you think it's going to make a difference for me?
Well, that's a very common question because I know many people feel boxed in. They don't have the resources to work with. The expectations are get this out quickly with minimal fuss and make sure that there aren't a lot of complaints.
Because we're just compilers. We've just taken the wisdom of thousands of others, research scientists, world-class e-learning developers, and compiled it, and we're putting it out there. We got started on this because we were frustrated, and we see each other at conferences and things. And over the years, we've just been griping about the state of e-learning. How come it's not getting better? You'd think it gets better, but maybe it's getting worse. And so really, we started with that goal of trying to do something, do anything. We want people to take advantage. We want people to run with this. And if people go out there and make money teaching workshops on this, or if vendors, create e-learning that's aligned and they go out and advertise.
What we're trying to do is not close off the seam. We're trying to raise the floor. We don't want the bad stuff to keep happening. We want to start lifting that lowest stuff. They're the spark to start doing much more creative, embedded, minimalist, wildly engaging and effective activities.
Is this just about self-study e-learning?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because we didn't really show these principles, but some of the first principles that we had were it's not e-learning is not or learning and development is not always the answer. Sometimes you need performance support. Sometimes you need to fix the process. Sometimes you need to clarify goals. The second principle was that even when learning and development is the answer, e-learning isn't always the answer. Sometimes there are really good reasons why you would want to do some other format, maybe social learning, or maybe blended, or maybe there's a good reason why you would want to do classroom. So we're not, one of the things we wanted to be clear is we're not saying that e-learning is the answer to all things or even that it should be. However, when you are doing e-learning, when it is an appropriate answer, there are good ways to do it. And so what we were really kind of looking for is fundamental learning principles, and I think that there's definitely kind of a focus on sort of asynchronous self-study, but at the same time, almost everything that we get talked about is, the vast majority of what we talk about is actually applicable as learning principles across a broader view, but we were really very much focusing on the problem of specifically, e-learning as it frequently gets implemented.
What if we can't implement all the 22 principles? Or what if we just can't implement them right away? Does that make us a bad people?
So it would help our whole industry if people would just start to implement one of them and then another one and another one. Just a small subset of these would produce products that are more effective than the typical sort of thing that I see, which again is generally just far too focused on dishing out a tremendous amount of content, hoping that people will remember it, be able to answer questions on a post-test, and be done. And most everybody's going to forget that material right after the post-test. They're not going to recognize contexts in which they should perform a task differently, and so on. With risk of going back over this material again, I think you'll see tremendous improvement in the effectiveness of what you do by just adding one or two principles, and then hopefully on your next project keeping those and adding a couple more.